Hello, everyone. So, I wanted to address a very common swerfy talking point. If you're a swerf, I don't hate you. I used to be you, so I understand your talking points and where you're coming from. So, I'm just saying. But I wanted to address one of them, and it is the idea that prostitution is paid rape and that it can never be sex because the money doesn't make it sex. So it has to be rape. And that there can be no intimacy or desire in prostitution, and therefore it is rape. And so, like, all that sex workers ever experience in the sex industry is violence and rape. And yeah. So this is a very weird talking point, but it's actually normal in our patriarchal society. And what it does is it reduces women to children because their consent does not really matter. What they say does not really matter because society has decided that they couldn't possibly consent to this. So I'm just gonna talk about reality for a minute. I feel like a lot of people who use this talking point are usually really, really brainwashed people that legitimately believe this stuff. And usually it's for a variety of factors, and a lot of those factors tend to be religiously based and very idealistic. And then the other one is that a lot of people who use these talking points, they tend to be young people who like haven't been in a lot of relationships and like haven't really seen or thought about the real world that much. And I'm not saying this to be mean, I'm just like throwing it out there because I don't like the idea of enthusiastic consent, or the idea that like every person you have sex with, like you're gonna desire them and all that stuff, because I feel like it misses the way people actually work and the way we actually navigate sex and consent. To put it this way, like my parents are very stereotypical, like, you know, cis heterosexual monogamous couple. You know, my mom waited until marriage. But yeah, like the household was turbulent. Their sex lives were turbulent, right? Sometimes they would have sex out of boredom. There were so many moments that were not romantic. And if you read stories about married couples, most of their sex lives are not romantic at all. Like they don't even have sex because they desire each other anymore, or because like, and I'm not saying this about most married couples, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean? You get older, you get sick sometimes, you have days where you don't feel so hot and you just look like shit. And your partner loves you. And love is more of a choice and a commitment, not so much of like a conditional thing where it's like, oh, you look like shit today. I choose not to love you today. Although you may feel that way. Sometimes love is hard. But yeah, you know, like moments that you read about these relationship stories or these marriage stories where it's like, you know, you have all these bills, you have all this other shit, you don't have time to really spend time together anymore because you have like kids and bills and mortgages to worry about, and you just look at each other like while the baby's like throwing up on you and you're like, so we're gonna have sex tonight? Yeah, sure. Not desire, not really an intimacy thing, but more of like a kind of commitment of like, we're just gonna have sex every day even if we fight, you know? So my parents, you know, would talk about getting divorced, like during like a really turbulent time in their relationship, and then you would hear them having sex. And it wasn't like the happy kind of sex, it was more of a commitment kind of sex of like, let's just do this kind of sex. But that's real life. In real life, the idea that sex is always enthusiastic and you're always just desiring the other person and like all that, like that's not real, you know? There are times when you're going to be having sex and you're not going to want to do certain things. Like maybe you don't want to eat out your partner because they smell and you kind of write it out because you want to please your partner. Or maybe you're just in a bad mood, you have a headache, you fucking, like, your partner did something shitty or said some shit, but you fuck them anyway just to please them. Like, you know what I mean? The idea that sex is always, like, enthusiastic and every time you have sex, you're going to desire the person or desire every single thing that's happening or that you choose to do is not real. It's not true. I don't think any relationship actually operates like that. Any good relationship would actually operate that way. I'm not saying that to be mean. If you want your relationship to be that way, by all means, but sex is an activity. You know, people do it when they're bored, people do it because they're having a bad day, and like sex is kind of like an alcoholic drink for them. It just kind of makes them feel better. It's like, well, our lives are shitty, let's just fuck. You know, that's real life. That's what it is. And to me, when we get on this topic, it reminds me of how when I was a little girl, I was always told that the first time I have sex, it's going to be painful. Everyone told me this. All my authority figures, all my teachers, all the media would tell me that because I am a girl, when I have sex, it is going to be painful. But then after the first time, it'll feel good and I'll like it. It was just weird. It was a weird kind of, it felt like a threat. It felt scary. Like I was terrified of having sex at all for the first time. So I put it off. I put off like losing my virginity despite all this, you know, sexual tension and feelings I had inside of me. I did not want to fuck because I knew the first time I did fuck that my hymen would be torn apart, and that I would be bleeding and I would be in pain, and it would be a really traumatic moment for me because that's what everyone told me. Here's the truth. That's not real. That is a myth that was created by patriarchy for a reason. The truth of the matter is, we tell women to expect pain and violence and abuse, to just accept that as kind of a rite of passage into womanhood. But you don't need to be in pain. In fact, that's not normal. If you're a woman and you're experiencing pain and you don't want to, that isn't normal. And you shouldn't be bleeding either. Unless you have like a condition, you shouldn't be bleeding during sex. So for those of you who don't know this, I'm gonna explain why this idea kind of came about and why. Okay. So if you're a girl, and basically if you're a girl in general, what is it called? You need foreplay. Sorry, I forgot the word for a minute. You need foreplay to get stimulated and wet, and once you have adequate foreplay and you've gotten warmed up sexually, and you know you're like ready mentally and emotionally to have sex, your pussy opens up and you can take more dick. I'm so serious. This is what happens. Like you open up more. So if you are not aroused, your pussy is a lot tighter, basically, and it's not as open. So a lot of dicks, if they go into you and they're aroused and you are not, it's gonna hurt. If they go at it too rough, if they go in too deep, it's gonna hurt because your pussy is not aroused enough to take it. It hasn't opened up enough yet. It doesn't have enough lubricant to make it a fun and easy experience for you. It's closed up. So the pussy opens up. It becomes longer when it's aroused. It becomes wetter when it's aroused. So yeah. Now, because most guys are not taught to do foreplay, they're not taught that it's important. They are basically taught sex in a way that smooths their ego. So they are taught that if a woman really wants you, she'll just take it whenever you want it. You don't have to arouse her. You just you get hard, you can just stick it in, and that's fine. They're also taught that they should go at it as hard as they can, and that is supposed to be the way you have good sex, right? They're also taught that, again, for their ego, that if a woman is really turned on by them, that they won't need any lubricant because, oh, you're so wet, and the girl's dry as fuck. But here's the thing, and I'm telling you, if you're watching this, if you're a girl, don't be ashamed to use lube. You should be using lube. You should be using lube even if you are wet, because it makes the experience easier for you. You should experiment with lubes and find the one that's best for you. But the truth of the matter is, guys have such small egos that they will get offended if you use lube and won't want you to. even though you absolutely should. You should use it. Anything to make you comfortable. If you need foreplay, if you need to watch porn beforehand, tell the guy, like, I need time to be aroused. Give me time. Like, you know what I mean? If he really loves you and he wants to fuck you, like, give me time, dude. Like, you're aroused, you're up, like, wait for me to be up, wait for me to be turned on. Because then the experience will be better for you. It'll be more fun. It'll be easier on your pussy. And you'll have a more fun time, and it won't be painful. So the idea that when you have sex for the first time you're going to bleed and it's going to be painful, it will be if the guy does not do foreplay, if you don't use lube, if you aren't even aroused, and he goes in and out fast. What that does, if he goes fast like that and doesn't like prepare you in any way, is it literally traumatizes your pussy. It literally traumatizes it, and it can cause a tear. If they do that, it's called a vaginal tear or something, and you'll bleed. You might bleed from the tear, or you might bleed internally because he did that much damage to you. Now again, as a society, we've been taught that the guy doing this your first time is normal. You should just accept it. But the truth of the matter is, your first time shouldn't be painful, and it shouldn't be bloody, and it shouldn't be traumatic. So it's just a complete lie, because we would rather teach girls to accept pain and traumatic sexual experiences rather than teaching men how to make sex fun and enjoyable and easy for them. We don't want to teach men to please girls or to make them feel safe in the bedroom. So we would rather teach girls like, oh, hey, your first time will be really traumatic. You're going to bleed and be in pain your first time. We'd rather do that because we can't sit men down and be like, hey, so like, don't hurt women in bed. See, we can't do that as a society. We can't. It's too bad for their egos. And we're just a patriarchal system that would rather teach girls to accept pain as a female rite of passage. This is, not even bringing up the fact that we completely ignore trans women and gay sex in this entire conversation of sex ed. So yeah, that is the idea behind the whole prostitution is paid rape, and you can't consent to it. It's the idea that women should just accept, if they're going to be sexual, that the experience will be full of rape and pain and blood and abuse, because we don't want to teach men how to treat women nicely in bed. Like, that's not a possibility for society. That being said, it's just not my experience that like men are horrible customers. Like they tend to be really nice. Customers are regular people. Like I don't understand why I can get into conversations with people and they acknowledge that customers of sexual services tend to be regular, everyday people, but they'll be like, oh, there's no possible way you could ever have intimacy or a connection with any of them. And that's just kind of weird, because even if you are a promiscuous woman and you're doing this for free, you will likely have feelings for some of the people that you're randomly fucking, and they might develop feelings for you, and many little relationships might form, or even long-term ones may form. Like, that happens. So it's weird that when people go into the sex industry, immediately people are like, oh, but it's not possible here because reasons. It's just a very limited viewpoint, in my opinion. So, yeah. I might talk about this viewpoint more because I just feel like people who use this argument have not thought it through enough and are usually like really naive about the real world. I think I'm going to tell you one more story and I'm going to end it. So this is an extreme story. So if you've ever read the book Night, I forgot how to pronounce his name. Elie Wesley? I remember. I'm sorry. Anyway, he died like, I think 2 years ago, but he was a Holocaust survivor. And he was a teenager during the Holocaust. And there was a story that stuck out to me in the book very vividly because it was just such a tragic moment for me. It was when he was in the train that was going to send them to a concentration camp. and they were all like bundled in there like sardines, right? So women, men, women, you know, children, like everyone was in there in these boxes, knowing that they were going to their deaths, knowing that something bad was going to happen, and they were going to the concentration camps. So there was a point when they were close, or midway through the journey, I think, but it was dark, and everyone, a lot of people in the box cart, whatever, took off their clothes and started having sex. And he was a teenager when he experienced this. So just, you know, teenager with a bunch of kids on the ground. It was dark, and you could just hear people taking off their clothes quietly, not saying anything, and just starting to have sex. Because they knew they were going to die. And on impulse, they wanted to have human touch and to have sex, to have an orgasm before the stuff they were going to be experiencing at the concentration camps. You know, taken in as prisoners. That sat with me. Now again, those people didn't know each other, they didn't have relationships with each other beforehand, so there was no intimacy. And you wouldn't say those people weren't consenting to that interaction, because they were. So yeah, I feel like this argument that prostitution is just rape misses the point of human connection and human sexuality in reality. Yeah, kind of an extreme example, but it shows my point that you don't really need to desire somebody sexually, like in the typical romantic way that we envision in Hollywood or in Disney movies. And you don't need intimacy in order to have sex. Like, sex can be something that you do because you feel impending doom. And that's the complexity of human sexuality. Bye, guys.